It's July 3rd, 1971 in Paris. The poet, rock god, and lead singer of The Doors, Jim Morrison, is found dead in a bathtub. He was only 27 years old.
James Douglas Morrison.
At least that's what we're told. What followed was a storm of confusion, secrecy, and decades of conspiracy theories, resulting in one of the most controversial deaths in rock and roll history. In the spring of 1971, just after recording Alley Woman with The Doors, Jim moved to Paris for a fresh start. He was burnt out from the rock and roll lifestyle and the pressures that fame brought. Paris seemed like a good place to escape the fast-moving LA lifestyle, shake off his alcohol addiction, and focus more on his poetry. After all, Jim had always seen himself as more of a poet than a rock star. And what better place to write poetry than Paris? He joined his girlfriend, Pamela Courson, in her apartment, who had already been living there. Although a few months later, in the same apartment, there was one night Jim did not return to bed. Courson claims that the couple returned to their apartment around 1 a.m. after attending a late-night movie screening. She woke at 6 a.m., noticed he hadn't come to bed, so she went to check on him. She found him in the bathtub. At first, she thought he was playing a joke, as he often did, but this time, he wasn't moving. Morrison was pronounced dead. The official cause? Heart failure. No autopsy, no toxicology report. It wasn't required by French law, because nothing was suspected. That was his death, on paper. But is it the truth? Hey T&H community, you might notice this video feels a little different than what we usually share. That's because it's part of a new storytelling project we've been working on, a more narrative, documentary-style approach that lives on a separate channel we've launched. Don't worry, our core content isn't going anywhere. T&H will continue to be your go-to destination for thought-provoking videos, with the core of the channel being Alan Watts content. Although if you have any interest in our new narrative approach, we'd love if you checked out our new channel, T&H Biographies. Thank you for your continued support, T&H community. Now let's get back to the story. The strange circumstances surrounding Jim's death left a lot of unanswered questions. There were only two people we know of that ever saw his body, Pamela and Jim's friend, Alain Ronay. The signature on his death certificate is eligible, even though Pamela forgot the name of the doctor who signed. To this day, no one knows who it was. As far as his funeral goes, his casket was closed. Both of his parents, his brother, and sister were alive at the time of Jim's death, but Pamela told the American embassy Jim had no living family. This allowed for a quick, no questions asked burial at Père Lachaise Cemetery. Alain Ronay, a longtime friend and photographer of Jim's, was one of the last people to see him alive, and one of the few to witness what happened in the hours after his death. Many years later, Ronay revealed his account of Jim's passing in an article he wrote titled, "Jim and I, Friends Until Death." On July 2nd, just one day before Jim's death, the two spent time together walking around Paris. Ronay recalled that Jim seemed unwell, anxious, and struggling with a strange case of very powerful hiccups that plagued him all day. Their conversations veered towards existential themes. Oddly enough, death was one of the main topics. Jim was reluctant to let Ronay leave him. Although begging him to stay, Ronay eventually left the cafe they were at. This would be the last time he ever saw Jim. The next morning, Pamela called him in panic. Jim was already gone. Ronay rushed to the apartment. Then Pamela told him her story. She stated that the previous night, her and Jim returned to their apartment after the movie screening and began snorting drugs together. This was out of character for Jim, considering his drug of choice was alcohol. Then Jim began to play all of his songs, one after another, eventually asking Pam for more drugs. Then they both went to sleep. Later, Pamela woke up to Jim experiencing breathing problems. She dragged him to the tub, fixed him a bath, then went to bed. When she woke up again, she noticed Jim hadn't returned to bed yet. Ronay, Pamela, and others worked quickly to cover up what had really happened. There was fear that if the overdose came to light, there would be a scandal, and possibly legal consequences for everyone involved. Ronay convinced authorities that Jim would never do drugs, he only drank, resulting in no autopsy or toxicology report. To delay any further attention, he gave them Jim's name backwards, Douglas James Morrison, rather than James Douglas Morrison. Ronay believed Jim overdosed, likely in his apartment, but none of that ever made the official report. It was a story they agreed to bury. But according to nightclub manager Sam Bernett, Jim didn't die in his apartment at all. In 2007, Bernett finally told his side of the story. He claims the real story starts at the Rock and Roll Circus nightclub around 2 a.m. Bernett says Morrison came to the club that night, looking to buy drugs for his girlfriend. Not long after, a cloakroom attendant reported someone locked in a bathroom stall. When Bernett and a bouncer broke in, they found Morrison collapsed over the toilet. We were certain he'd been snorting heroin because there was foam coming out of his lips, as well as blood, Bernett recalled. A customer that worked as a medic pronounced him dead on scene. Then 2 unknown men, believed to be drug dealers, carried his body out of the club, into a car, then disappeared. Bernett says that shortly later, he received a call from a club representative, warning him to keep quiet about what happened. It's believed he was then brought back to his apartment, where he was found dead in the bathtub. Bernett claims that singer Marianne Faithfull was also in the club that night and warned to stay quiet. Although when Marianne came out with her side of the story, she didn't mention the Rock and Roll Circus nightclub at all, which adds more questions to Jim's death, especially considering he had joked several times about faking his own death. Marianne's story revolves around her boyfriend at the time, Count Jean de Breteuil, a known drug dealer to rock royalty. It is said he dealt drugs to Keith Richards of the Stones and supplied Janis Joplin with the drugs that killed her. Years later, in an interview with Mojo magazine, Marianne Faithfull stated, "I was living with Jean at Le Hotel in Paris, and it seemed that he was the guy who killed Jim Morrison. That's what he said anyway. I've killed Jim Morrison. He provided the gear." Marianne recalls feeling a sense of trouble when her then boyfriend left to pay a visit to Jim's apartment. "I could intuitively feel trouble, I thought. I'll take a few to an owl, and I won't be there. And he went to see Jim Morrison and killed him. I mean, I'm sure it was an accident. Poor bastard. The smack was too strong? Yeah, and he died." When Jean returned home, he fled to his mother's house in Marrakesh and took Marianne with him. He died from an overdose, less than a year later, at age 22. To this day, theories surrounding Jim's death still circulate. Some people believe he never died at all. After all, his social security profile is still somehow active and traces to the New York area. He often joked about faking his death, escaping the madness of fame to live freely under a new name. A recent documentary, Before the End, Searching for Jim Morrison, explores the theory that Morrison became a man known as Frank, a janitor in Syracuse, New York. Frank has similar speech patterns, a scar where Jim had a mole. His eyes are brown, although appear to be ringed with blue, suggesting he wears color-changing contacts. Even an old photo shows him with Doors drummer John Densmore. When approached, of course Frank denies this theory. But who wouldn't? It's been over 50 years since his disappearance. Regardless of how Jim died, or whether or not he's still alive, he will be missed by friends and fans around the world. Although he may be gone, his legacy lives on through his music and poetry. Here's a collection of some of our favorite interviews featuring Jim's uncomparable insights.
You have to be in a constant state of revolution or you're dead.
That's the part of the performance that I enjoy the most, where I have a chance just to pick up vibrations from the music and what's coming from the audience, just kind of follow it wherever it goes.
It's kind of like secular religion in a way, I guess.
And you could say that the Doors' performances with Jim Morrison gave off a religious, or more accurately, spiritual energy that is hard to put into words. But what is it that congregated thousands of people together to witness these spectacles? Was it the sheer talent of the band, or was it something much deeper? Jim explains a sense of empowerment that like-minded individuals feel when assembling in large crowds. He takes this analysis a step further when he breaks down the swarming theory.
I think in a way, rock concerts have always served a function. It gives a lot of people with the same station in life chance to gather together and kind of assemble and just feel the sheer mass of them that exists, the numbers.
I think people enjoy being in crowds. It gives them a feeling of power and security in a strange way. They like to rub up against hundreds of other people that are like them, kind of reinforces their truth. It has something to do with swarming theory. The idea that in insect and animal species, when the population starts outstripping the food supply, the animals or insects swarm together. It's a way of communicating and working out a solution, or making each other, signaling their awareness that there is danger. And in nature, somehow a balance is worked out. For example, in LA or New York, in many big cities, you feel crowded. You feel psychologically crowded and just physically crowded. People are getting very neurotic and paranoid. And I guess things like rock concerts are a form of human swarming to communicate this unease about the population.
But not every band is able to take advantage of swarming. There's a level of authenticity it takes for a group of artists to generate a massive fan base like The Doors. In order for artists to do this, they need to connect with their audience on a relatable level.
What the people want, they want an artist or a band to come along that's just totally casting aside all the past and all the business associations. They have to give the impression we're doing this for a reason. It's not because we're out here to make a lot of bread off you people, you know. They want to feel that the group is a part of their community rather than something that's being laid on from somewhere else on top of it.
Community is often found when individuals with strong and often outlying ideological beliefs band together to create a movement. And part of the community found in Jim's fan base are those that were involved in the anti-war movement of the 60s. 5 years before the Vietnam War ended, Jim shared his views on war in this 1970 interview with Tony Thomas.
Jim, I don't think there's any topic that has sort of defined the young revolution more than the topic of war. I don't know anyone who's really in favor of war, but today we seem to have an entire young generation absolutely opposed to the very idea of it.
And probably because they're the ones that always fight the wars. They're the human fodder for the war machine. There just seems to be no way around it. There's just no cause. I'm sure that the whole basis of the war going on now is economic. I think young people just got tired of being grist for the mill. It's a funny thing. From the comfortable position of your TV set in your living room, war is a very, no matter how horrible, it's the horror, it makes it very glamorous, you know. It's a great drama, life and death right there, a struggle. And we're all infected from youth, you know, with little kids running around playing war and playing cowboys and Indians or whatever. You know, it's somehow it's just ingrained in you from the beginning that there's something heroic, you know, proving yourself in battle and all that kind of thing.
The anti-war movement rejected the traditional idea of the war hero, the person who is revered for their participation in violence and conflict. Throughout all of history, society has always felt the need to worship some kind of hero. Here Jim predicts what kind of heroes people will be looking up to in the future.
I think the new heroes will probably be political activists. In the 20s, it was sports figures. 30s and 40s, it was movie stars and World War II aces and all that kind of thing. Then the music figures became the heroes. I think the next heroes will probably be a more intellectual sort, political activists and perhaps scientists and computer experts, people like that. People that have an understanding, an intellectual awareness, and a knowledge of how things run, how modern society runs, and they'll probably be the new heroes.
This was a fairly accurate prediction considering some of the popular figures prominent in today's society. In another interview, Jim had another accurate prediction that had to do with the future of music. His description of combining machines with vocals is a foresight into what became the hip-hop genre.
The new generation's music will be, they might rely heavily on electronics, tapes. I can kind of envision maybe one person with a lot of machines, tapes, and electronic setups, singing or speaking and using machines.
What Jim may not have predicted is that this newfound reliance on technology, whether it be in music or more broadly in culture, has developed a neglected attitude toward physical touch. As society progresses, we tend to experience life as a second-hand reproduction of reality, rather than witnessing it firsthand, even more now than in Jim's time.
Somehow, life gets restricted to what can be seen, rather than what can be touched or experienced physically. I don't know whether it's a natural, civilized human fear of involvement, because touch, physical involvement, leads to all the, the real basic existential moments in life. Sex, death, love, they have really nothing to do with seeing, experiencing secondhand. You have to get in there and actually do it. There just seems to be some kind of natural civilized inclination to avoid contact with the nitty-gritty of life.
This preference toward mechanical labor over human beings embracing the nitty-gritty in life is partially responsible for what Jim calls the feminization of society.
Do you think there's much of a difference in the style of life affecting the man-woman relationship today?
Well, when you look at history, it seems to be cyclical. There have been many periods in history where women were the major controlling influence in life. Matriarchal societies and all that kind of thing. I think women are becoming increasingly important. It's a ridiculous thing to try and talk about, in such simple terms, but I think the influence of women is becoming more and more felt. Life is becoming more and more feminized. There's no frontier to conquer, and hunting and fishing and all that. It's not a basic survival thing. And in a highly complex and industrialized system which we're engaged in, machines take the place of an earnest day-to-day tackling of survival, and when that disappears, then you get increased feminization.
Are these advancements in civilization worth the repression? It seems like no matter what problems we solve, from technological to political, there's always new problems that arise from our initial solutions. Every effort we make to advance civilization dilutes the human consciousness further and further from its original state.
That's the basic problem, whether progress, the progress of civilization, the evolution of civilized culture is really worth it. And, there have been some amazing accomplishments, beautiful accomplishments, but the question is it worth it? Is it worth the repression? And that's something everyone has to answer every second of their life.